Welcome to the deep dive. So, today we are looking at the most famous parade in history. But what if I told you the entire crowd cheering in that parade was actually chanting a violent military war cry, and the man they were cheering for was openly weeping in dread?
Yeah, it's a completely jarring image, isn't it? I mean,
Hmm.
it completely shatters that polite Sunday school version of the story we're all so used to.
Right.
We expect a conqueror entering a city to project sheer dominance, but the reality of this event is just, well, it's something else entirely.
Okay, let's unpack this because today we have a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got historical context, deep biblical commentary, and some incredibly insightful sermon notes.
And they completely flip the traditional narrative on its head.
Totally. So we're covering a sequence of events in the life of Jesus, specifically from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11 through the beginning of chapter 12. And the mission for this deep dive is to explore how the crowds completely misunderstood Jesus' mission.
Right, they wanted an earthly political conqueror.
Exactly. But Jesus was actually ushering in a spiritual kingdom, one rooted in humility, true fruitfulness, and a radically different kind of authority.
Yeah, and to really grasp the sheer tension of this moment, we have to put ourselves in the dirt on the side of the road that day.
The famous triumphal entry into Jerusalem.
Right. But basically everything you think you know about what that crowd was feeling is probably backwards.
So let's start with the atmosphere. Our sources note that it's the time of the Passover feast. So you've got anywhere from 2 to 2.5 million Jews camped around
A
Jerusalem.
massive crowd.
Yeah. But why is that specific holiday so combustible?
Well, because Passover is literally the annual celebration of God liberating the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt,
So it's heavily focused on freedom.
entirely focused on freedom. And you have to understand the crushing weight of their current reality at this time. Palestine is an occupied territory under the iron fist of the Roman Empire.
Right, Rome is in charge.
And the tax burden is absolutely suffocating. I mean, Rome isn't just taking a percentage of their income. They are seizing their grain, their livestock, their actual livelihood.
Wow. So everyone is just desperate.
Completely desperate. You have 2 million people who are impoverished and, frankly, primed for a revolution. They're looking around thinking, God freed us from Egypt. Surely today he frees us from wrong.
So the powder keg is completely full. And here comes Jesus riding over the Mount of Olives, and the crowd absolutely erupts.
They do.
They're waving palm branches, throwing their coats on the dirt road, and shouting, "Hosanna!" Now, if you grew up hearing this, Hosanna sounds like a happy word. Like hooray.
Right, like a cheer.
Yeah, but that's not what it actually meant to them, is it?
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is the actual linguistic and historical meaning of those actions.
Yeah.
Hosanna is a Hebrew phrase that literally translates to save us now.
Wait, save us now?
Yeah. It was not a polite greeting of praise. It was a militaristic, nationalistic battle cry. It was an expression of deep, boiling impatience. They were screaming, get us out of our troubles right this second. Fight for us.
Which completely changes the visual of the coats and the palm branches. I mean, we tend to look at that like an ancient version of rolling out the red carpet for a celebrity.
Yeah, but consider the historical context of those specific symbols. In their history, taking off your cloak and placing it in the road for someone's horse to trample over, that was an action strictly reserved for welcoming a military usurper.
Like who?
Well, they did it in the Old Testament for a commander named Jehu. He was leading this violent, bloody coup against a corrupt royal family.
Okay, and the palm branches.
That traces directly back to a man named Simon Maccabeus.
Right.
He was a ruthless resistance fighter who actually managed to briefly win back Jewish independence from the Greeks.
Oh, so they waved palm branches for him.
Exactly. The crowds waved them to welcome a man who essentially used guerrilla warfare to slaughter his political enemies.
So they are throwing a massive, politically charged military parade. They want a warlord.
That's exactly what they want.
But if the crowd is demanding a violent revolution, why does Jesus choose to ride an unbroken donkey? I mean, that's like bringing a bicycle to a tank battle.
That is the perfect analogy. The crowd is so obsessed with their own expectations that they are completely ignoring the visual message Jesus is sending them.
Because a military conqueror rides a war horse.
Right. And a Prince of Peace rides a donkey. By choosing a donkey, specifically a colt that had never been ridden, Jesus is deliberately fulfilling an ancient prophecy from Zechariah.
Showing them what kind of king he actually is.
Exactly. He's visually declaring, I am a king, but I am absolutely not the kind of king you want.
And the emotional disconnect between the crowd and Jesus is just staggering here. The crowd is thrilled, bursting with this violent pride, but our sources point out that Jesus isn't smiling and waving.
Far from it. He is sobbing.
He's actually weeping.
He's openly weeping over the city as he rides in, because he knows exactly the mechanism of human violence. He knows that if this crowd continues down this path, wanting to overthrow the Roman war machine by the sword, they will be utterly annihilated by the sword.
And tragically, he was right.
He was. Just 40 years later, in AD 70, that violent nationalism boiled over into an armed rebellion. The Roman army responded by surrounding Jerusalem, starving the inhabitants, and completely leveling the city.
Over 1 million people were slaughtered.
Yeah. So Jesus is weeping because they're demanding a political quick fix, but completely ignoring the spiritual reality that would actually bring them lasting peace.
So he enters the city. Everyone expects him to take a right turn, head straight to the Roman garrison, and start the revolution.
But he doesn't.
Right. He ignores the Romans entirely. He turns left and heads straight to the Jewish temple. And this leads to an event the very next morning that honestly always left me totally confused.
Victory.
Yes. Jesus is hungry. He sees a fig tree with full leaves in the distance, but when he gets to it, there's no fruit.
Yeah.
So he curses the tree, saying no one will ever eat from it again.
Which seems pretty intense.
I have to admit, when I first read that, it seemed incredibly petty. Like, wait, Jesus just curses a random tree because he needs a snack and it's out of season. What am I missing here?
It does seem incredibly out of character until you view it through the lens of the Old Testament prophets.
How so?
Well, prophets like Jeremiah and Hosea, they didn't just speak their messages. They acted them out in bizarre ways to grab people's attention. This is what we call an acted parable.
Okay.
A fig tree with full foliage gave the promise of fruit. From a distance, it looked incredibly healthy and vibrant. It had all the outward appearance of life. But up close, it was entirely barren.
All leaves, no fruit.
Exactly. Jesus is using this tree as a living, breathing metaphor for the target. He's actually about to attack the temple itself.
Because right after cursing that tree, he walks into the temple complex and it is absolute chaos.
Complete chaos.
He doesn't go after the external competitors, the Romans. He walks right into the headquarters of his own people and starts auditing the internal corruption.
Exactly. Picture the sheer sensory overload of the temple courtyards. The first thing you'd notice isn't the sound of prayer, it's the noise of a thoroughfare.
People were actually using the sacred courts as a shortcut, right? To carry their shopping bags and luggage from the eastern part of the city over to the Mount of Olives.
Yeah, they were treating the holiest site on earth like a bustling bus station.
And mixed in with the commuters, you have the money changers and the livestock merchants.
Right, and that's where the extortion mechanism comes in. To worship, you needed to pay a temple tax and offer an unblemished animal sacrifice. But the religious elites, it created a complete monopoly.
How did that work?
Well, you couldn't use regular Roman or Greek coins to pay the tax. You had to use special temple money. And the priests charged a massive 60% exchange rate just to swap your coins.
60%? That's insane. For anyone listening who has ever been forced to buy an $8 bottle of water at an airport or a stadium, imagine that feeling of being trapped by a monopoly.
Yeah.
But here, your literal access to God is being held hostage behind a paywall.
It's actually worse than that. If you were poor, the acceptable sacrifice was a pigeon.
Yeah.
Outside the temple, a pair of pigeons cost about 9 pence.
Okay.
But inside, the priests charged 15 shillings for the exact same birds. That is an astronomical markup.
Oh my goodness.
And if you tried to bring a cheap bird from outside, the temple inspectors would conveniently find a tiny flaw and reject it, forcing you to buy their overpriced birds.
They were systematically extorting the poorest, most vulnerable people who just wanted to worship God.
And the physical location of all this commerce is what makes it so tragic. All this noise, the animal manure, the haggling, it was entirely set up in the court of the Gentiles.
That's the crux of it, isn't it?
It really is. The temple was designed with concentric courts. The outermost, largest court was the only place a foreigner, a Gentile, was legally allowed to go to pray.
It was supposed to be a tangible symbol that God loved the whole world.
Right, but the religious leaders filled that specific court with so much chaos that a Gentile couldn't possibly find a quiet moment to connect with God. The elites turned the temple into an exclusive, profitable club for themselves.
Effectively telling the rest of the world, you are not welcome here.
Exactly.
Which perfectly explains why Jesus quotes the prophet Jeremiah, calling the place a den of robbers. He isn't just talking about the financial theft, is he?
Not at all. Think about the geography for a second. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem was notorious for violent bandits who would hide in caves, literal dens of robbers waiting to ambush travelers.
Oh, right.
A den is where a robber goes to hide after committing a crime. Jesus is saying that these elites are using the religious respectability of the temple as a cloak to hide their profound greed and sin.
So they honestly believe that because they were performing the correct religious rituals, their selfishness was somehow justified.
Exactly.
So, bringing it back to the fig tree, the crowds wanted a miraculous superhero to fix their political problems. But Jesus was focused entirely on the moral rot. The temple was the leafy fig tree, glittering, massive, and busy, but completely dead inside.
No actual spiritual fruit.
Right, so Jesus essentially shuts it down.
And that structural teardown creates a massive vacuum.
Mm.
By condemning the physical temple as a corrupt, fruitless institution, Jesus now has to show his disciples the new mechanism. If they can't go to the temple to access God, where do they go?
Right, because Jesus has just handed his disciples the ultimate blank check for spiritual power, completely bypassing the temple.
Yeah.
Because the very next morning, the disciples are walking past that same fig tree from the day before, and they are utterly shocked. It is completely withered from the roots up, dead.
It happened fast.
And Jesus uses their shock to introduce this new mechanism, absolute faith in God. He tells them that if they say to a mountain, "Be thrown into the sea," and do not doubt in their heart, it will happen.
We really need to define how Jesus explains faith here, though, because it's not just the power of positive thinking.
Right.
The mechanism requires having zero doubt in your heart regarding two specific things. First, that God can do it, which is a test of your belief in his sheer power.
Okay.
And second, that God will do it, meaning your request is entirely aligned with his ultimate will.
One of the sources shared an incredible historical anecdote about this. It's a story from 1930s China involving the Christian teacher Watchman Nee. I read through this, and the outcome is just staggering. Can you walk us through what happened there?
It perfectly illustrates this kind of mountain-moving faith. So Watchman Nee and a 14-year-old boy were on an island where the locals worshipped a sun god. The villagers were holding an annual festival during the dry season, and they boasted that for 286 years, it had never once rained on the day of this specific festival.
Almost 3 centuries.
Yeah. But this 14-year-old boy, full of this exact kind of faith Jesus was talking about, publicly told the priests that his God would send rain to prove who was real.
Which is a terrifying claim to make in public.
Watchman Nee himself was initially terrified. But then he remembered the biblical prophet Elijah, who also prayed for rain to challenge false prophets. They believed it was God's will to reveal himself to this island, so they prayed with absolute zero-doubt faith.
And what happened?
Well, the tension on the morning of the festival was palpable. Under a completely cloudless blue sky, Nee and the boy sat down for breakfast and simply thanked God for the rain they knew was coming.
Wow.
By midday, as the idol of the sun god was being carried out for the parade, torrential rain suddenly poured down. It rained so hard and so fast that the priests actually slipped in the mud and the idol fell and completely shattered.
It's an unbelievable story of raw, reality-altering power. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. Jesus is talking to his disciples about harnessing this incredible, miraculous power. And in the very next breath, he pivots completely.
He does.
He says, whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone. Why on earth does he connect moving mountains with forgiving your annoying neighbor?
Because it's an operating system issue. The kingdom of God operates entirely on grace and unmerited forgiveness. If you harbor unforgiveness, bitterness, or resentment, you're running on the operating system of the world. The exact same corrupt software that ruined the temple. You can't ask God to boot up a miracle in your life if your heart is running an entirely incompatible system.
That makes so much sense.
You cannot harness the power of God if you refuse to reflect the character of God. The miraculous is always tied to the moral.
Wow. You can't ask God to fix your circumstances if you refuse to let him fix your heart. That is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah, it is.
But meanwhile, you have to imagine the religious elites in the temple are starting to realize they're being made entirely obsolete by this new teaching, which explains why they come out swinging.
They do. They march right up to Jesus in the temple courts and demand, by what authority are you doing these things?
Straight to the point.
It's a calculated trap. They are the official recognized gatekeepers of religion, and Jesus hasn't run his actions past their committee.
But Jesus traps them right back. He says, I'll answer you if you answer me. Was the baptism of John the Baptist from heaven or from men?
It's a brilliant tactical move because it forces them to expose their own mechanism of decision-making. If they say John was from God, Jesus will rightly ask, well, then why didn't you listen to him?
Right, and if they say the other thing,
If they say John was just a crazy guy in the desert, they know the massive crowd surrounding them will riot because the people universally loved and respected John.
so instead of seeking the actual truth, they just calculate what is politically safest for their own survival.
Exactly. They look at Jesus and say, we don't know.
They cared more about their own positions of power than the actual truth. And since they refuse to acknowledge the truth, Jesus refuses to give them a direct answer. Instead, he tells them a story. The parable of the wicked tenants. Can you break down the symbolism in that parable?
The imagery would have been instantly recognizable to the religious leaders because the prophet Isaiah used the exact same metaphor centuries earlier.
Okay, so a familiar story.
Right. Jesus talks about an owner representing God who plants a beautiful vineyard representing the nation of Israel. The owner leases it out to tenants, the corrupt religious leaders holding the power.
And then harvest time comes.
Right, and the owner sends servants, representing the prophets, to collect the fruit. But the tenants beat the servants. The owner sends more. The tenants kill them. Finally, the owner says, I will send my beloved son. They will respect my son.
And the beloved son is, of course, Jesus himself. So, what does this all mean? When you look at the tenants' reaction in the story, it reveals a level of utter delusion. When they see the son coming, they say, this is the heir, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours.
They really said that.
They actually thought that by murdering the owner's son, they would legally inherit the property. They were so blinded by their own greed and their desperate desire for control that they convinced themselves they could steal God's own kingdom right out from under him.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Jesus is doing something incredibly bold here. He is looking right into the eyes of the men who are actively plotting to murder him. And he is saying, I know exactly who you are. I know exactly what you are planning to do to me. And I am telling you right now, it will not work.
Just calling it out directly.
Because he then asked the crowd, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. He is prophesying the absolute end of their religious monopoly.
And then he shifts the metaphor entirely. From an agricultural vineyard to massive architecture, he quotes Psalm 118. Ironically, the exact same psalm the crowds were shouting during the parade, and talks about a stone that the builders rejected, which eventually becomes the cornerstone.
We have to understand the sheer physics of a cornerstone in ancient architecture. It wasn't just a decorative plaque with a date on it.
Right.
It was the massive foundational stone that bore the crushing weight of the entire structure. It determined the perfect alignment of every single other wall in the building. Our sources note that some of the foundation stones of the temple complex weighed an astonishing 110 tons.
That is massive.
Yeah. So Jesus is looking at these corrupt leaders and saying, you builders are going to reject me. You're going to throw me out in the trash. But God is going to make me the 110-ton cornerstone of an entirely new building.
Wow.
He is declaring that God's redemptive plan for humanity is going to bypass their corrupt temple entirely and be built exclusively on him.
And the religious leaders absolutely knew he was talking about them. But instead of pausing, instead of reflecting and saying, wait, are we the bad guys here? They just harden their hearts even further and immediately start looking for a way to arrest him. It's chilling.
It really is.
So, bringing all these threads together for you listening, we've seen a desperate crowd that wanted a political warlord to violently crush their Roman enemies, but instead, they got a weeping king riding a donkey.
We've seen a magnificent, glittering temple that was completely devoid of actual spiritual fruit.
And a cursed fig tree that proved outward appearance means absolutely nothing without inner reality.
And we've seen religious leaders who were so desperate to hold on to their earthly power and their monopolies that they literally rejected the Son of God.
This raises an important question for all of us as we reflect on this sequence of events. When you look closely at your own life, are you cultivating genuine, humble, spiritual fruit? Or are you just maintaining the outward, socially acceptable appearance of religion? Are you just showing off leaves?
And when the ultimate authority of Christ challenges your comfort, your wallet, or your desire for control, do you submit to it? Or do you act like the wicked tenants, desperately trying to run your own vineyard and keep the profits for yourself.
It all comes back to that parade, the triumphal entry. The greatest tragedy of Palm Sunday wasn't just that the crowds misunderstood Jesus' mission. The real tragedy is that they welcomed the king publicly with massive, enthusiastic fanfare, but they rejected him personally the moment he didn't meet their political expectations.
That's powerful.
Think about your own expectations of God. When he doesn't act the way you want, or when he doesn't fix a problem the way you demanded, he fix it. Do you still let him be the cornerstone of your life? Or do you walk away disappointed because he didn't bring a tank? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.